Hello and welcome to this video on pipetting, a few best practices. This is going to be a brief video where I discuss some of the best practices that I have learned through reading reputable pipettes manufacturers' recommendations. So let me begin by discussing the air cushion pipette. This is the most common pipette that we use in laboratories, and it's good to know how this pipette actually works. So let's, for example, take a look at the pipette here. Inside the pipette is a piston. So you'll have something like this where you have a piston, and I'm drawing the piston. It's this rectangle right here. This is the piston. And the piston is responsible for drawing a specific volume of liquid into the pipette tip, as well as dispensing it using volume pressure differentials via Boyle's law. Beneath the piston that I just drew in this rectangle is an air cushion area. Basically, this area right here altogether is basically an air cushion area. In fact, it goes down all the way into the pipette. And this air cushion area is supposed to prevent contact of liquid with the piston, and the air cushion will also facilitate either the drawing of liquid or the dispensing of liquid. So the idea here is that you have, first of all, the piston and the air cushion, and of course this right here is called the plunger, which you will press on in order to dispense liquid, and also you press on and release in order to draw liquid into the pipette tip. So just keep in mind that the piston that I drew in this rectangle controls the process of dispensing the liquid. So as well as drawing the liquid into the pipette tip. So basically when you press the plunger or the button on the top of the pipette, it's going to push this piston downwards. And when you push this piston downwards, you're going to force the liquid out of the tip in a controlled manner. This is basically Boyle's law in action with pressure and volume differentials. So obviously the piston is initially in like a raised position, and when you depress the plunger and the piston moves downwards, that reduces the volume inside the pipette tip, and that causes the liquid to be dispensed. And then, of course, when you're drawing liquid, it's the negative pressure that's going to take the liquid up into the pipette tip. Okay, so let's get into the various best practices of pipetting. And the first thing is the posture by which you hold the pipette relative to the ground. So when you're engaging in liquid uptake, you want to hold the pipette as vertically as possible in relation to the ground. And you want to hold it ideally at a 90-degree angle. So ideally, this would be a 90-degree angle. And you should understand that greater deviations from the 90-degree angle result in increased volume deviations from the the accurate volume that you wish to uptake. So just keep in mind that if this lady was to hold this pipette at an angle, say at this angle, so suppose this rectangle is a pipette, then that's going to cause a volume deviation in the liquid that's been withdrawn from the container. And if she was to hold it at an even greater angle, say this angle, for example, then this would cause an even greater deviation from the ideal volume that this pipette is supposed to have taken up. Another thing to keep in mind is the immersion depth. So you want to immerse the pipette as little as possible into the liquid. Now, there is a caveat to that in the sense that you want to be careful as to not aspirate air in the process. So for example, you can see here that the top of the liquid, you can see some foam, and the top of the liquid is about here, and the pipette tip is halfway in between. Ideally, you would want the tip actually somewhere closer to the surface, so maybe right here. And you want to ensure, of course, that you don't immerse the pipette so little into the liquid that you end up, for example, having the pipette tip here and withdrawing air in the process. The risk of withdrawing larger amounts of air increases when you're dealing with larger tips with larger pipette volumes that you have your pipette set on to take up. So just keep in mind that you want to immerse the pipette as little as possible into the liquid, but also ensure not to aspirate air. This particular advice comes from the pipette manufacturer Eppendorf. Another good practice to pipetting is pre-wetting. So when you are pre-wetting, you're basically filling and dispensing the pipette tip several times before transfer of the liquid. So the ideal recommendation is to pre-wet the pipette tip at least 3 times. So pre-wetting will reduce the evaporation of subsequent aspirated liquids because it will increase the humidity within the pipette tip. Now keep in mind that when you're dealing with more volatile liquids, this idea of pre-wetting becomes even more crucial, but as good practice, you should be pre-wetting all the time, at least 3 times before actually transferring the liquid. Lastly, I want to end with some points on droplets. So I'll begin with discussing the removal of droplets before dispensing. So let's assume that a person is holding this pipette and they are withdrawing liquid from this Eppendorf tube. Now, as you can see here, there is a bit of a droplet. So after taking up the liquid from this container or from this reservoir, you want to touch the pipette tip with the internal side of the reservoir to remove the excess droplets. So basically, you'd want to grab this pipette tip and touch it on the inside of this reservoir container so that you can get rid of the droplet before transferring the liquid. And lastly, I want to discuss the idea of dispensing residual volume when you are dispensing liquid into a container. So here is a pipette, and let's assume that all the liquid in the pipette tip has virtually been dispensed, with the exception of some droplet or some liquid that remains inside the tip that is being a bit stubborn. So the idea here is that after dispensing the liquid and before releasing the plunger, here it's important to note that this is before you release the plunger, you want to deliver the residual liquid inside the pipette tip by touching the pipette tip with the side of the container, obviously the internal side of the container.